Hey guys, Kenny here. I'm here to review the 2010 romantic drama war movie, Dear John, starring Channing Tatum, Amanda Seyfried, Henry Thomas, Scott Porter, Richard Jenkins. Now, I have to say that I really did like this movie. The basic plot is it starts off in spring break in 2001 about with this young man John Tyree, played by Channing Tatum. This is when he first meets Lynn Curtis, Savannah Curtis, played by Amanda Seyfried, and they start really getting close to each other, really starting to connect. And John Tyree is also a soldier in the Army Special Forces, so he ends up having to leave her for a short period of time, and the best way for them to stay in contact with each other is to write notes back to each other. So John writes his letters saying "Dear Savannah," and Savannah writes her letters saying "Dear John." So that's where "Dear John" comes from. He ends up being stationed somewhere. I think he's in his final year to enlist, but then the September 11th attacks happen, and he's torn between returning home and his sense of duty to the Army Special Forces. So he does go home for a very short time, and John gets to see Savannah and his father, Mr. Tyree, played by Richard Jenkins. And he has this huge coin collection. I mean, it's like vintage coins almost all around. And there's this one penny that Mr. Tyree never wants to part with, does not want to part with. And I think John is there for a short time, and then John has to go. He goes back in to with the army. He chooses to enlist, and he's there for the next 7 years, and he faces increasingly dangerous missions. He soon ends up living entirely for Savannah's letters, but despite his efforts, their relationship starts to drift apart. So then Savannah is sad but resigned. She sends John a letter informing him that she's begun seeing a friend of theirs, Tim Whedon, played by Henry Thomas. So once John reads that in her last letter, John is deeply disturbed, depressed, and frustrated. So he has all of Savannah's letters that she has sent him. He throws those letters into a fire and burns all the letters. And then John is on a mission he's in a dangerous area. He ends up being shot several times by an enemy. He wakes up in a hospital, and the doctors and the army officials tell him that he is being sent home. He's relieved, but he's afraid of how he will confront Savannah. And John is able to go back home after he being sent home, and not just being sent home, he's being sent home for good, indefinitely. They're letting him, their army is letting him go for good, and he ends up having to go home because his father has either has a stroke or a heart attack. And John wrote his father a letter the night before. A night before he went to see John went to see Mr. Tyree at the hospital. So John reads Mr. Tyree that letter. John almost gets through it, but then he gets to a part where he says, "You know what the last thing I thought of? You know what the last thing I thought of?" He starts repeating that a few times. Then he breaks down, and his father takes him, cradles his head on his chest. So, and then I think John goes back to his father's home, and then he gets news that his father passed away. I think that's what happened. So John goes to see Savannah, and she's already married to Tim Whedon, and Tim now has cancer, I believe, and Savannah has now made this horse camp Horse Sense, and it was some years back when she was doing this a camp for autistic kids. She was only able to do it that one summer. And then when John and Savannah see each other at Savannah's Camp Horsen's little horse bend, I think they hug. So that's a very nice moment. And then John and Savannah go to Savannah and Tim's house, their new house, and they get to talking. And then John starts kind of getting really upset with Savannah about why Savannah didn't wait for him, and she ended up marrying Tim. So, and after that little argument, John leaves, leaving Savannah bawling her eyes out. And then I think John goes to see Tim at the hospital, and Savannah also meets up with them. So that's a nice scene, John seeing Tim. And then I think Tim passes away, so I think John after some time passes, I think it's in 2007, John and Savannah finally have an embrace, and I think at that moment they're finally able to be with each other for good, for the rest of their lives. So I highly recommend this. If you haven't already, I would highly appreciate it if you would subscribe over here if you're watching the video by itself, or subscribe down here if you're watching the video on my channel.